Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the special joint meeting of the DeKalb City Council and the DeKalb Finance Advisory Committee, November 18, 2019. A couple of housekeeping notes before we begin tonight, and before I ask City Clerk Lynn Fazekas to make the roll call of both the City Council and the Finance Advisory Committee. I am told that our microphones tonight are live all the time. There are no buttons, so I would ask you to keep that in mind as you may make a comment or two to your partner to the side of you, but they are live all the way. And this meeting, as you may know, is being telecast live on Channel 14, is being taped for those who may not be able to watch it live tonight. I will ask City Clerk Lynn Fazekas to, first of all, call the roll of the DeKalb City Council. I will then hand it over to the chairman of our Finance Advisory Committee, Mike Peddle, who may have some comments, and he will then ask for a roll call of the Finance Advisory Committee. So City Clerk Fazekas, please roll call the DeKalb City Council.
Morris.
Here.
Finucane.
Here.
Smith.
Here.
Perkins.
Here.
McAdams.
Here.
Verbeek. Favor.
Here.
Mayor Smith.
Here.
7 present.
Thank you. Chairman Peddle?
Officially call the meeting of the Finance Advisory Committee to order. Clerk, call the roll.
Peddle.
Here.
Hagerson.
Here.
Neely. Here. Parch.
Here.
Prahlad.
Here.
Tarazinski.
Here.
6 present.
Thank you. Before we embark on public participation, and I only have one person who has indicated a desire to speak tonight. If anybody is in the audience who would like to speak, kindly fill out a speaker request form. They're in the back of the room. Hand those to our City Clerk, Lynn Fazekas, and she'll get them to me. After having conversed with our Finance Advisory Committee Chair Peddle, we both agree that tonight's public participation, we want anybody to speak on any item they might like. However, because we're going to be speaking to a number of items tonight within the budget itself, what I'd like you to do is to make a comment, make your comments regarding any item that you might see in the budget. We will certainly take that as a meaningful comment. What we don't want to have happen, I don't believe, and I think Chairman Peddle agrees with me, is what happened at our last Finance Advisory Committee. If you recall, we had a couple of people in the audience, and it became a dialogue between members of the audience and members of the Finance Advisory Committee. And Mike, if you would agree with me, I think that it breaks the flow of the discussion by, in that case, the Finance Advisory Committee, in this case, the Finance Advisory Committee and the City Council. So if you have questions regarding within public participation, comments or all that, we certainly welcome them, as you well know, for anyone who has been attending our meetings. So having said that, we do have one person who would like to speak under public participation, and that's Mark Charvat. Mark, if you'd come to the podium, please.
All right, good evening, everybody. It's good to see some new faces up here, and I certainly hope that we hear from all of you tonight. I hope you all had a chance to review the budget. Previously, I live in the 4th Ward. I welcome our new 4th Ward Alderman and neighbor, who lives actually very close to me, and looking forward to hearing from you tonight as well. There are some issues I had with our previous alderman when it came to budget discussions. He indicated, and he said loudly at one point in time at one of these meetings, that there is no place in this budget we can cut anything. I found those words very troubling. He says we're cut to the bare bones. There are areas in the budget we can examine, and you can examine for further discussion. Look at your home budget. When you look at things at your home budget, you're always looking at things you can cut. There are unnecessary expenses, things you can combine, and I hope we do maybe collate some things and maybe make some cuts. I do have a few suggestions, and I'm not sure exactly where within the budget any of these items are, but I'd really like to see some cuts in the areas of some frivolous items, like, as far as I'm concerned, car allowances, telephone for staff, mileage reimbursements, meal reimbursements, subscription services, memberships, and dues. That's a lot of fluff, and I know we are really cutting it tight when it comes to this budget. These are some areas I'd like to have looked at. Also, I brought this up in the past, and I'm very much against the sidewalk snow removal downtown. Those businesses should take care of their own sidewalk snow removal. Other businesses that operate within the city take care of their own sidewalk snow removal. I have a problem with the fact that we are funding this particular expense for downtown businesses. It just seems unfair for businesses that are not downtown to get this service for free or at the expense of the taxpayer. One of the items on the budget is the discussion of the 4-cent gas tax that the city will be imposing. And of that 4 cents, I see that 1.5 cents of that is being allocated to our airport. We all discuss infrastructure in the city and what citizens value most. They value the roadways and their neighborhoods. Very few citizens are concerned with the airport. If money needs to go to the airport, it would be wise to maybe consider fee increases for those who use the airport. The average citizen living within your ward probably doesn't even visit the airport. So if we are going to raise this tax, I'd really like to see that 1.5 cents go to roads and infrastructure, stuff that everybody uses. I'd also like the council, and perhaps I can have a further discussion with my alderman, SSA, excuse me, SSA number 3. I don't believe we are actually utilizing all the funds in there, so I do believe this expense is a little high, and perhaps we can lower that amount in special service area number 3. That's all I have to say, but I look forward to a lively discussion, and I hope to hear from each and every one of you with some suggested cuts and some revisions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. That is the last person who has indicated a desire to speak to us tonight, so we will move on to the consideration of the proposed 2020 budget. I would like to make a couple of comments, if I may, prior to getting into that. First of all, to echo what Mr. Charvat had said, welcome to our new 4th Ward Alderman, Greg Perkins, your first special meeting. It's great to see you here, and I think you'll enjoy the give and take between a very, very important commission in our city, the Finance Advisory Commission, and the City Council. Also, this is Sheila Prahlad's second meeting, relatively new member of the Finance Advisory Committee, and I welcome you here. I know you spent some time. You made the point of coming in to visit with our city manager, and I applaud you for that, because even though some of us have been around perhaps for a number of months, we all have questions, and the budget itself reflects so many different various aspects. Before I turn it over to City Manager Nicholas, I just want to commend him. This is the most complete narrative that I've seen in city budgets. I like the fact that Bill did not mince words. Bill was very candid when he made his narrative. I hope you would agree with that. But having said that, there are things that we're going to want to discuss. And so I applaud you, Bill, for doing this. It took me about, I think, at one stretch, about 3 hours to go through this, 165 pages or whatever it was. And I must say that these 3 hours going through this budget was almost as enjoyable as watching the 3 hours of the Chicago Bears last night. It's unbelievable. So that's a comment and a compliment, City Manager Nicholas. So before we turn it over to Bill, Mike, do you have any initial comments? Okay. City Manager Nicholas, it's your document, and you can sort of give us the lay of the land of how you'd like us to proceed
Okay.
tonight.
Okay, I don't know about you, but it was painful watching the Bears last night, so we're going to try to make this a very positive experience for all concerned. Good evening, everybody. And I have, thank you, Mayor, for your comments. I want to hasten to say, I was going to say this in the course of my remarks at the top of the meeting tonight. A city budget, 250 pages of numerical and narrative budgets and budget references are not the work of one person, they're the work of a team. The people you see in the audience tonight are our department heads. They had a very big role in this. Ray Munch, to my right, had a very big role in this, and as I said in my transmittal letter, I'm very grateful to him for his help through the year, and particularly in the last month as we're pulling all this together. And also in our finance office, in particular our two accountants, our senior accountant and accountants, Susan Rahman and Bob Miller, all played a hand in helping me pull this together for your review tonight. So we have 250 plus pages here. I had Greg said something about that. That's at least a couple of cocktails, isn't it? And I don't intend to read every page or deposit every page, but I do want to go at a pace that is your pace. So I will move, and when you want me to stop, or if I see voices or hear voices or see faces puzzled, we'll stop. I've had the opportunity to hear from some of you just in the last day or so, and I appreciate your help on that. It's our intent to take your suggested revisions, what we see as a consensus on certain things, and to work those into a revised budget. I don't know where we're going to stop tonight, but we'll move, I guess, as long as you want to move through the budget. Our original plan was just to do the general fund. If we go further than that, then that's up to you. And we will make revisions that then, frankly, have to be done on Thursday, or from whenever the meeting ends on Wednesday night to about noon on Thursday, so it can get out for the general public to see in time to be reviewed on first reading on next Monday night, on the 25th. So, ambitious and a busy period of a couple of days. So let me get going. The budget document that some of you have on a laptop, and some of you have on the in the 3-ring binders that we distributed, is a corpus of 58 funds. The total of the budget, and these are numbers that are sprinkled through the transmittal letter and also in some of the budget background, so I'm not going to dwell on it too much, but you have an overall budget proposed for next year of $103,200,248 in revenues, which offset $101,864,270 in proposed expenses. The city budget is organized in a very particular way. It's organized on a fund basis, and if you haven't had time tonight or in the next days, if you look on pages 28 and 29 in some of the introductory chapters, you will see an explanation of what that means, being organized on a fund basis according to generally accepted accounting practices. I won't belabor that. It's a little bit of background for you. Clearly, the budget is about services and how we intend to pay for them and how we arrive at decisions with respect to the priorities and the prioritization of the services that we intend to provide. And the people who provide the services are, of course, uppermost in our minds and in the minds of the people who live here and work here. We are proposing a budget that accounts for 192 full-time positions in 2020, which is 5 fewer than last year. 40 part-time positions, which is 4 fewer than last year. total of 9 fewer positions, and you can see that illustrated on page 8 in your budget. The general fund is clearly the biggest of the funds in the budget, and also the one that most of our residents, if they have an interest in our city budget, are familiar with or have become partly familiar with. It's where the operational services are found, as well as the administrative services, and where all the personnel expenditures, for all intents and purposes, are closeted in that one fund, the general fund. In my transmittal, I had to try in 4 or 5 pages to hit the reader in a friendly way to identify what the council's priorities have been and are, particularly the top priorities for the next fiscal year. So I focused on our property tax and also on our general fund reserve, 2 particular areas of importance in our financial plan. And then also the capital program. As Mark said, Mark Shabbat said it at the outset of the meeting tonight, people are wanting streets repaired in this community. I don't think there's a dispute about that. So as we have discussed both in the committee of the whole, with the council, with the Finance Advisory Committee in the last month, and we will discuss some tonight, we have some plans for how we can address those deficiencies in our capital plan and our capital program for 2020. How are we doing so far? Okay? All right. Let's now get into some meat, and I'm going to walk you through. I'm going to jump over a little bit of the background and some of the charts and some of the definitions in the introductory chapters, if you're okay with that. Is everybody okay with that? And jump into general fund detail. So if you want to go to page 48, 49, that's where we'll jump off tonight. I think it's important to note that we have talked about pensions recently, we've talked about IMRF, we talked about other things aside from discretionary spending on operations. And if you'll notice, and you probably have noticed as you've gone through these introductory pages, if you back out the fire and police pensions, our IMRF pension obligation, and our health insurance, which, by the way, combined to about $1.2 million, then our discretionary spending proposed for 2020 actually decreases by about $64,000. Now, that people could say, well, that's just that's fun to say, but what does that mean? But it's true that if people are looking at the services that directly connect with them, fire, police, public works, and administration, particularly with respect to the billing and our AP and our finance functions, that's the discretionary spending, and that is basically flat in respect to what it was in 2019. Revenues do increase across the general fund by about $411,000, which is just a fraction of a percent higher than it was in FY19. Clearly, personnel, benefit, and pension costs make up the greatest share of the general fund expenditures, 79% and change to be exact. No surprise to most of you. We have tried in the 10 pages from 49 to 59 in your budget book to hit the highlights and also to use some graphics to show where we are in terms of the portions of the revenue assigned to property taxes, sales and use taxes, intergovernmental revenues such as state income tax, gross receipts such as utility tax, and other things such as licenses and permits. And hopefully those have been instructive to you. And if you want a little more background to what each of those categories are about, then we've also put some definitions and a little bit of summary in that section. And as we move to expenditures on page 52, we see under personnel a breakdown of that pension part that I've been talking to you about for the last couple of months. And the one thing that I do have to change in my transmittal letter, I was making a reference to the fact that there's been a operating task force that the governor appointed this year to work on the pension crisis. And that task force, in collaboration with a number of labor groups and the Illinois Municipal League, were successful, I think, in helping to build a coalition in the State House that last Thursday voted out a bill which has, I don't believe, unless it was signed today, does anybody know whether the governor signed that, which consolidates, yeah, I didn't see it in the afternoon, I stopped looking, but we will know more about this in the next couple of days, but I will be adjusting the background accordingly. But what that means is that we are going to see in 2020 and beyond the movement toward the consolidation, or the actual consolidation, really, of the police pensions and fire pensions in two large funds at the state level. Right now, there are over 650 of these funds combined, police and fire together. And this will help with some of the overhead, because each of these funds usually has an actuary and also a financial manager. And we know that the lobby in behalf of the financial managers and actuaries was strong in this conversation, but I think the greater good prevailed here. So that's one piece of the challenge posed by the state legislature 20 years ago in defining how we will pay for fire and police pensions. The other challenge is a little trickier and maybe even a higher challenge, and it's going to take the legislature a while longer to work through that, and that's the actuarial calculation of what is owed in order to stay properly funded. IMRF years ago came up with a pretty good approach to that, but there are a number of approaches that will be debated and discussed. So we'll keep you informed about that. It will have an impact on the 2021 budget, I suspect. And at this point, it's too early to tell what kind of savings we can achieve by that combination and consolidation that I spoke of. And we have not presumed to put in much of a plug number to relate to that until we know more about it. So, any questions about the pension issue? Yes, Tom.
Just quickly, do we know that that's voluntary?
No, the consolidation is mandated.
The second question would be,
yeah.
Is it discrete in that the liabilities of the city of DeKalb are kept separate, the analysis is separate, everything is separated?
Yeah, what remains on the part of the individual pension boards, which will still remain active, is not the financial investment part, the investment of the funds, but the decisions about when people pension out and so forth. Okay.
Thank you.
Mhm. Okay. Are there any questions that anybody had on the general fund revenues? I do want to point out one thing. I think this was a matter of interest maybe last year, and I've heard it referenced since. If you look on page 56, you'll see a number which may not be as intelligible as others in that far right column. You see near the bottom, about the fourth line up, it says $311,000 transfer from the water fund. What is that, and why is the water fund putting that particular amount into the general fund? And that is something that might be loosely described as a payment in lieu of taxes. We calculate, based on our CAFR, last was 2018, what the value of our water capital assets is. We take that times our tax rate in 2019. Actually, the 2018 tax rate payable in 19, and it came to $310,951, rounded up to 311. So that's that number. I don't know if that was important to you, but it's been a matter of discussion in the past. Okay.
I do have a question.
Yes, Phil.
So, Phil, do you think the change in the sales tax on car purchases is going to have any impact on us, where now any trade-in over $10,000 will not be deducted from the purchase price? You'll have to pay a tax on that. In other words, if you bought a $30,000 car and you had a $15,000 trade-in, as it sits now, you'd only pay tax on that $15,000 difference. But as it's going to be after the first of the year, you will pay tax on anything, the $20,000, because you only get to not pay for the $10,000.
I'll have to get back to you because I'm not sure if we pay that tax.
Okay. You not pay it, but get it.
Yeah. I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll have to, as you know, one thing, when we get to the capital funds, we're talking about looking harder at lease plans. We used to lease a number of vehicles, and we got away from that. We're buying them and paying as we go. There are limitations to that strategy when money is constrained, and so that should be a part of that conversation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just going to keep going unless you say stop or somebody puts up their hand. The mayor will club me, and I'll stop. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, Mike.
I do have a question on the transfer from the refuse fund. Maybe I missed this. There's a big jump there.
Yep,
Could you talk
that's a good
about
question. Been back and forth on that. So, and in fact, the wisdom of some of your colleagues has weighed on me. We had, so when we had the contract signed with LRS, I wasn't here, but I understand that we figured there was an administrative overhead of about 9%. Is that right? Right. So that's more than a 9%. And so what were we doing? There is a challenge that we all have, which is that fact, and that until, even though at the end of 2019, we show some very good news, and I wanted to say that earlier, we've gained about $2 million in our general fund balance. Yay. But we're just at 26% at the end. If all plays out and everybody, department heads have been very, very frugal, if we just continue to kind of coast to the finish line here, we'll have that $2 million to sock away. But we're just barely over the what is our policy preference. And as we discussed a little bit at the Finance Advisory Committee, our current bond rating, which is important to us, is A1, and it is with a negative outlook, which means that the rating company, and it will be before long, is going to take another look at where we are in terms of our policies, meeting our policies, especially the coverage that we have in our reserve balance. And in that context, as thin as that was, and because the money in that refuse fund is drawing interest at about 1.8%, we thought we would put it to work in the general fund. But I have a proposition for you. It doesn't make me feel clean from a budget standpoint. That's putting money in that isn't immediately going to go to use in general fund operations. So there's another interesting thing that's happening in our city, and it's probably happening around the state and around the country. People, particularly people with limited means, are finding other ways to gain health care. And what they're doing is they're relying on our fire department and our paramedic, our highly trained paramedic ambulance crews to provide on-the-go health care in lieu of having to pay, particularly if they don't have insurance, having to go to a clinic or a family doctor or whatever, and as an alternative to going to the emergency room. If you look at our ambulance fees, and if you look at page 55, you will see a very interesting trend. At the end of 2017, so with the 2017 revenue in the book, we had earned $1,023,981 in ambulance service fees, okay? Look where we are projected to be at the end of the current fiscal year, just at the end of December of this year, $2,250,000, more than doubled in 2 years. And if you look at our ambulance calls, and Jeff McMaster is in, I want to see him, where is he? There he is. And Jeff can attest to this. So you look at the incidence of calls that we have for these types of services, it has doubled and tripled in just this 2-year period. And we don't necessarily see a change in that trend, although when I see trends over 2 years that we had not seen before, I want to go soft on them. So we projected a budget number of just 2 million, which shows a drop in 250. So I have a proposition for you, which is that we increase this to what we think is probably where it should be, that raise it by 250,000, which is at least steady with this year, and we take an equal amount out of the transfer from the refuse fund to the general fund. That makes it refuse fund solid and appropriate, and it also raises the general fund revenue as from the category from which is legitimate. Does that make sense?
Well, Bill, this is the first time that we've taken a look at a line item, and you've asked us to
Give me some guidance.
give you some guidance on
It's
that
an easy
change.
fix.
What Bill is suggesting, obviously, is that we take some of the money off of the refuse fund budget and put it back into the ambulance fees for a budget item. Again, budget is a budget is a budget. It's not a firm number, but it is something that we can take a look at. So
Basically,
does
may
that
I
make-
restate it?
Yeah, please.
We're just returning a portion, a couple $100,000 probably, of refuse fund money
Okay.
from the general fund back into the refuse fund. And we're increasing, based on the trend lines and the actual incidents that we know, increasing the ambulance fee revenue to a number which is more consistent with the trend.
Bill, can you speak to, I think that we increased the ambulance fees
We did.
in the
We
very
did.
recent
We
past.
did, a year ago.
So how,
How much is
there's,
that?
well, actually, I think there's 3 pieces to it. Number 1, how much is due to the increase? Number 2, how much is due to increased usage? And number 3, how much is due to just being, having better success at collecting the fees that are billed?
A little bit. I'll let Ray address that.
So, those are interesting questions, and a lot of what you just asked played into how we came up with the revenue projection. Because the reality is, if you look at the 2019 amended budget, we budgeted about 1.6 million, and that took into account the revenue increase. Now, even at that time, we took a pretty conservative estimate. Our ambulance biller suggested you estimate 80 to 90% of what you might gain in your new fees in that first year. But even at that, as you can see, what's really played out this year has been substantially greater than that, which again is why we took sort of that soft approach and making sure that that's not an outlier and something that's happening one year that we don't expect to repeat itself. But there is definitely something to the idea that rides are up significantly, the number of ambulance transports continue to rise. So I think there's a number of factors at play here, but definitely would like to see a trend play out for a longer period of time.
Okay.
What was our success in collecting those fees, though?
I would have to pull the numbers on the actual collections. So what we get from the ambulance billing company on a monthly basis is a statement of collections, and then there's always write-offs included in there. So I would have to pull those numbers to see how the actual collections are trending this year.
So we just in the last year have changed to a new collection strategy and a new collection company. And the strategy now is it doesn't cost us as time goes along. There is a increment that's added to the bill that's owing over time. It's like the fine in effect on top of, which in effect covers our costs for administration during the course of this collection. And so it's to the advantage of the collection company to be pretty assertive to go after the well past due accounts. We're not talking about beggaring people and calling them up and harassing them, but these are accounts that go unpaid for a long time. Okay.
Tom?
Yes, thank you. One other follow-up question and then a comment. In earlier discussions about this, it was thought that many of these could be covered by insurances. Do we have any understanding of how much of that is insurance related?
I don't, but I could certainly find out.
Okay. From the community's perspective, I think that
Yeah.
it's important,
Yeah.
particularly for
Yeah.
those who can do it that way. It's not burdensome.
Yeah.
They're already paying for their insurance, so it's recouping of what's due them.
Right.
The second comment I'd have, just on a general idea here, I'm not against transferring back to the general fund out of the refuse fund of admin fees that are earned and have been paid and collected. The money sits there unless there was some specific purpose for it, for refuse. Taking the majority of that back into the general fund makes some sense to me. As to the fact that you may be a little uncomfortable going up to full 250,
Yeah.
you know, that would mitigate needing to do that. And if it comes through, you're running ahead. So just some general thoughts on it.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Why don't we delve into the departments? We'll start with the legislative department, which encompasses the city council and mayor and the city clerk. Page 60 in your budget. One of the smallest departments in the city government. The salaries as defined in ordinance are listed on page 60. It also covers the very well-known DeKalb Municipal Band.
Any comments on legislative? Bill, do you have any further comments?
I might just point out, I gather this was a bit of an issue a year ago. I believe at the beginning of the 2019 fiscal year, the council had informed the band director that the allocation, the annual allocation would be dropped by 10,000. It was, and then the council restored 5,000 with the idea that another 5,000 would come to offset that cut would come from fundraising. We learned toward the end of the year, end of their season, I should say, that there were costs related to some of the usual things which are already included in the budget, which are sheet music and some uniform upgrades and so forth. But the other aspect of that are the chairs that they sit on, and as you can see, we didn't allocate money for that clothing. So I suggested that we add a 5,000 back and then stick with this level. We went from 57,000 2 years ago to 43 as proposed here, and I recommend that we stay there. It's a remarkable group of musicians, and they play for very little and enjoy it and bring quite a lot of comfort to people in this town. So I'm supportive of this. I think it's money well spent.
Mr. Mayor?
Excuse me, Bill. The number on the legislative side for wages part-time, the numbers don't seem to add up right. As I look between the mayor, 7 council members, and the city clerk, it should come out to 68,300, but you're only showing 64,885.
Should be the same as it was in 2019.
because you have the mayor at 22.5, you have 7 council members at 5,400, that's 37.8, and then at 8,000 for the clerk, and I show that coming up to 68,300.
I can address
Yeah,
that.
Go ahead.
So there is a 5% allocation of those salaries to the water fund.
Okay. That would explain it.
So those
Thank
amounts
you.
represent 95%.
Thank you.
That's a, new guy. I carried over the 19. That's also something, one of those little things, a residual of years of Peter to Paul, back to
Right.
Peter.
All right, thanks for
We'll
the
clean that up.
clarification, Ray.
Yep.
I just have a question.
yeah.
You brought up subscriptions,
Tony.
and I know that we had worked down from $20,000 to the $33.65. Is that the IML?
Where are you, Tony?
I'm sorry,
Dues and
61, page
subscriptions.
61, dues and
Yep.
subscriptions?
I'm going to guess that
Metro West.
Metro West was part of that, and,
Metro West
Yep.
and IML.
yeah.
Yeah, that was $10,000 or plus that we decided not to
Correct.
renew.
Took that.
Yeah, I do find the IML to be very valuable in
Absolutely.
terms of their lobbying efforts.
Okay.
So I think that's a subscription we should keep.
Okay, I'm going to move
Bill,
on.
I've got a question.
Yes,
On the
Ron.
Human and Social Services, what was the 3250 paid to in 2017? Because it's gone to zero. It's on page 61,
Okay.
about 8, or do you know? Because that was before you were.
That's shown in another place. That's our annual human services budget, and I will show you where that is.
I'm confused on that. That was our annual budget?
No, we just stopped taking it out of the legislative budget. So that's why those zeros are there, just to show.
So we still have a
Yes, we do.
social services budget?
Oh, yes,
Human and
yes.
social services.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Okay, okay.
It's about $125,000. We'll get to that.
Ah,
Okay. And that's a good question, though. As you go through a variety of these budget pages and you see some zeros to the right side of maybe the last couple of columns and so forth, that means that spending has been moved to another place, either council
Okay.
direction or to clean up. When we finally get to the TIF budget, you'll see TIF 2 ends and has ended, and so in 2020, you won't see anything but zeros in that column. And we usually, according to GAAP guidance, we usually go 1 year after the end of a fund with the zeros, just as a transition, and so people can understand what happened, and then we move on from there. Okay. City Manager's Office. As now we get into the operational departments, you will see in each one of these narratives a listing of what the principal managers thought were the accomplishments of the department in 2019, and then proposed initiatives for 2020. And I'm happy to answer any questions you have about what I've listed here for the city manager's office. We're going to be down one person in staffing level from where we were in the 2019 budget, and 2 persons from 2018. Okay. One thing that we did, this is partly a function of our new ERP program, but human resources and IT and finance are under administration, and we have them listed here as departments. It's just how our software has packaged this. And in some ways, that's not a bad thing, because it gets to show a little more definition to some essential functions in the administrative side of things. So the next general area is human resources. We have been steady there. We have 2 full-time and 1 part-time person in human resources. The routine that dominates a lot of their time is spelled out on pages 70 and 71. We have pointed out one particular thing that has been discussed at the council level, and that is the fact that with the new Illinois cannabis regulations, as with most employers, we are going to have to be looking hard at what the implications are and how they will be translated into our various personnel policies, and we're talking about that at the bargaining table right now with our police officers, and it's a very collaborative conversation, but we have to figure all that out. Okay. Finance begins on 74.
Hey, Bill, I do have one
Yes.
question on
Yeah,
on
great.
those, on the city manager's budget and the human resources one. I guess they're kind of interrelated.
Yep.
If the head count is going down,
Mm-hmm.
how is the budget amount going up for wages full-time?
What page are you on?
I'm
69?
on page 69, yeah.
Uh-huh.
So if we look at the projected activity, projecting 2019 to end at 351, and 2020 proposed budget of 400.
Yep. Well, the city manager took $30,000 out of his pocket in January or February of this year, and came up with some other allocations out of his pocket too.
Okay.
So it was restored here. If the council feels that I should go back to where I was in 2019, that'll be up to them. And the other 20,000 is a 2.5% increase across the board, which we had built into the budget.
Okay, thanks.
I might make one other point on that, and the council will recall this, but during the budget process last year, we maintained some headcount in departments, but froze positions, so the salaries essentially came out of the budget, but the headcount remained, if that makes any sense. So some of that is reflected in your 2019 personnel budget numbers as well.
Okay.
We cashed in also a management analyst position to help pay for, as council knows from some other things that were done, to help in the community development department, in particular the building function.
Okay, thanks.
Can you just repeat where that other 20K came from? I missed it.
The 2.5% pay increase, which is across the board. It sizes up with the contractual pay increases. Okay. Finance, I think we were at. There's a little detail on page 75 about where we are with the city's bond rating, which I think is worth reading. And we're also going to be looking at our investment, how we are projecting our investment income in 2020 and what we might need to do to find a higher rate of return while still protecting the principal. Right now and through the end of this year, you'll hear a lot of prognostications about whether we're heading in a more bearish direction or are we or not. And I heard 2 totally different projections in the course of the day today, and I think it's too early to tell what will happen, but it's pretty clear that nationally we're in a situation, notwithstanding extraordinary events that may happen, the impeachment of a president, a war, not a world war, but a war in some region. But we are definitely in a position with the Federal Reserve where we are seeing the reduction in rates, and I don't know, that can't go much further, but I don't see an increase in the rates happening. Looking at Sheila, I don't know what you think in 2020, but I don't see a reversal of that trend whatever happens at the level of the presidency. So, rates are going to remain down, and we'll need to see what else we can do. Okay. IT remains the same. We have 4 people. Jeremy and Doug and Mark are full-time, 1 part-time person, Jeff, who typically helps us with the televising of our council meetings and such. Their work will be very interesting in 2020. We are not only moving City Hall, we're looking to create a new broadcast center over at the library, which we will use certainly, but they will also be able to use with appropriate training. And about a month ago, the council concurred in a recommendation to move our fiber center over to a new building to be built by Syndeo on the airport property, and they'll be very much involved in that. So that small crew will be very busy. Okay, police department.
Just one, if I
Yes.
could, interject.
Tom?
On the information department, I noticed a startling number to some degree, and it's nice to see it broke out, $342,000 in ongoing software maintenance support.
Yeah.
I'm assuming that includes our new ERP system and all other software support. Is there an increase in that year over year, or is that just the running rate?
Which line item are you on, Tom?
I was on page 83 where the software support was broken out. It was part of the commentary
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
Info tech.
Yep. Yeah, that's Ray's domain. He's the person, they are his direct reports, so I'll let him address that.
So, any of the various software agreements that are contained in there, licenses and everything else, have annual escalators. Some do not, so it varies. Of that number, 342,000, the most significant expenditures are our police department has the computer-aided dispatch center for 911 and all their police reporting and records management systems. That cost alone represents about $125,000 a year. And then you have the ERP, and then every other piece of software that the city touches, from the website, annual maintenance, to subscriptions to use Adobe PDF software.
Thank you.
So is this a case where we've moved this now into INT,
Yes.
where it may have been scattered about in other funds in the past?
So it was all in information technology, but it wasn't really clear where it was located. Most of it was in a line labeled contracted services.
Oh, okay.
But just as a point of clarity and
I see.
transparency, we actually created the account line for software maintenance.
Okay.
Could have just said that first.
Hey, Bill, can I back you up a little
Yeah.
regarding that? Credit card payment upgrade under finance, does that, you and I had the discussion, because I've had several inquiries about the city absorbing the fees. Could you explain that again? Or why we have moved, and also will ERP absorb that, the credit card fees associated with paying your water bill, et cetera, if that were to come back into play or not? Did that make sense? I know I was looking right at it.
Yeah, so formerly, the city had absorbed all the credit card processing fees, which for, water fund transactions, as an example, was about $50,000 to $60,000 a year. So the decision was made when we switched to the new water billing software and the new ERP to pass that along to the customer. Interestingly enough, we had a conversation in the finance department, and even after making that change, credit card processing has actually continued to increase and not decrease, so that's not deterring people from credit card transactions at the front counter. It seems to be the preferred method, so our plan was to stick with that.
Thank you.
Are you sure you're permitted to add those fees on by the agreement with your credit card processor?
We are. We haven't run into any issues with that.
All right, Police Department. If you go to page 88, you'll see the org chart for the department. And I want to make note of something. When Chief Lowry, just before he retired, we had a deputy chief and 4 commanders. As you know, John Petrogallo has accepted the position of interim police chief, and he is evaluating that position. We're evaluating him in that position, and I will be making a recommendation to council in due course. So this, in that we are in transition, this is probably an org chart that will change slightly at the top level as a decision is made, but I don't know where that will go, so this reflects where we were about mid-year, and we'll carry that forward, and there will be time to make any adjustments as necessary. As you look at the narratives, I invite you to do that. We continue to strengthen our co-policing initiative with the University Police Department. There are a number of programs that I think the department can very proudly explain to all of us and to the community, and I think they have been largely successful. Recently, Chief Petrogallo and some of his commanders have been having meetings, making stronger connections with persons who are part of a variety of volunteer groups in our community who are looking to make this a friendly place to live in and a place where we can build trust over time. And I applaud them for that. And the diversity training that has been embraced and undertaken by the department is underway. And I had the opportunity about a month ago, 6 weeks ago now, to participate in that for 8 hours. And I think it's a good program. And I believe it's in December, John, mid-December, that another 18 officers, so the command staff has been through this, 18 officers, we have to go, can't just shut down the department, obviously, but we'll go in probably 2 or 3 more waves and work our way through the whole department. So I applaud Chief Petrogallo for his initiative there and for how it's been working out so far.
Anything on police? If not,
Let's move on to fire. Been an interesting year for the fire department. In addition to the strong service that they provide year in and year out in the way of fire suppression and EMS and community education, this year we've had more than our share of dealing with property maintenance issues and housing issues related to the conduct of one particular rental group in the community. And I think you know where I'm going with this. It's been a tax, particularly on the fire department and on the command staff and the chief and especially, and I thank Chief McMaster for all the work he's done there and continues to do and will have to do for a while, because we're dealing with a pretty intransigent group and without what we would consider to be a reasonable interest in the welfare of their tenants. So things have happened and things may happen again, and we'll be prepared. And I thank the fire department for being there. This is a step and a stretch beyond their routine responsibilities. The department's accomplishments include some reference to that. We also hired a deputy fire chief this year, at mid-year, Battalion Chief Mark Gilmore, who has been doing a very good job. And in 2020, one of the big initiatives will be the implementation of a new digital radio program, and that is highlighted in the background. And also the review and update of our EOP, our Emergency Operations Plan, which is something we periodically have to do. And I appreciate that the fire department is taking that on. Sometimes it's the city manager's office that takes a point on that, but I appreciate Chief McMaster stepping up and taking that on. Any questions? All right, I'm going to move on to Public Works. So at mid-year, a little bit beyond mid-year, we, together, the Public Works Management and the City Manager's Office had a series of conversations, came up with a plan to build in some new leadership and also to provide for a reasonable definition of duties across those managers. And tonight, Brian Favor and Andy Rye are here. They're at the top of the pyramid in the Public Works Department. Brian takes utilities and the engineering piece and the transportation piece, and Andy takes the streets part and the facilities part, which also includes the airport. And I applaud them both for stepping up and getting their arms more clearly around the functions that they are responsible for. And then I have just a very loose coordination over the work of that department, just as a report for the two directors. And they've been also, Brian in particular, has been very helpful to me in some of the development activity, some of the attraction activity we've been doing, and appreciate his presence at the table and all of his knowledge on the, particularly with the water system. And Andy has stepped up, he's been dealing with a lot of weather issues this year, but also has been working with me as we plan for the move to the new City Hall, and has been doing things in the downtown area with little expenditure, but lots of sweat and equity, and whether it's cleanup from time to time with all the construction we have. There is still debris in the downtown area. He's been helping with that. And right now he's battling snow to get to the leaves, to get those off of the parkway. So both of these gentlemen have shown a lot of leadership, and I appreciate it. Those, yes.
I just wanted to thank you guys and whoever.
Lynn, would you use your mic there?
Oh, I'm sorry. I particularly wanted to thank you for the new layout at Cornfest. That
Yes.
was wonderful. It made it so much better. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's an opinion shared by a lot of people. We plan to continue that. Okay, anything else? We're going to come back to Public Works, at least tangentially. When we get to the Water Capital Fund, we'll talk about some initiatives relating to the development that we're hoping to attract to the south side, and how that figures in, especially with respect to the water system that we have.
Hey, Bill?
Yes.
One question. I know Andy's probably tired of me mentioning this. Parkway tree maintenance, I know that was neglected for years. Have we increased our budget to try and recover?
Yeah. Whoever
Zeke.
wants to take it.
I know.
Andy or Brian, doesn't matter. Parkway trees program?
Yeah, raised fund. I mean,
Yeah.
I just know the number of complaints we've had. I just.
So the forestry services line item in general, we increased from 57,000 in 2019 to 90,000 in 2020.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of that is parkway tree maintenance. And we're also going to attempt to up our game a little bit on tree replacements because we had some deforestation from the ash borer over the past few years.
That would include I take it, the removal of all the dead ones we've.
Correct.
They seem
Yeah.
to grow. I know that's kind of,
Yeah.
never mind.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And that was in the narrative also, Tracy,
Yeah.
on pages 104, 105, along with what I think is great. And I just hope that some folks who are interested in how we raise our money and where our revenue comes from in the city and how we spend that money, go to the website and look at this budget. Because this clearly spells out where we hope to spend some of our money over the next year in terms of streets, roads, those things. And as you say, Tracy, tree and sidewalk replacement, et cetera. So I think it's, again, part and parcel of the negative that I alluded to early on, Bill, is very, very helpful.
Thank you. Let's go to community development. This is actually several departments. We do planning and economic development and the CDBG program, zoning reviews and entitlement such as annexations, construction permitting, code enforcement, all of that falls within community development. It's a very busy department. Since the end of February, I've been the department head in the community development, and that is not unusual, by the way, for city managers. It would be possibly a slightly larger city, but it's particularly an area with respect to planning and economic development that city managers should be very involved in, because we're trying to put our best step and feet forward with respect to new businesses and also in retaining existing businesses. And our offices are often, as I pointed out in the background, the first point of contact for new and existing businesses, contractors, and residents as well. So it's important that this be well organized and hopefully well managed. The size of the department is less than it was if you look on page 113. In this little staffing level chart, we don't include some contractual plumbing inspection, which we have 3 days a week in the mornings, which has been a pattern we've had for a number of years now. And also didn't include intern positions, which we are happy to work with NIU on. And sometimes those internships reside in community development, sometimes in the city manager's office and other ways. So one of the things that we did, and the council was a part of this, was to reorganize our building inspection code enforcement functions. And I'm going to do something I neglected to do at the last council meeting. I'm going to have Don Harper stand up, who is our new chief building official. Stand up. Second week, into the third week. And she's doing a great job. She is working 14 hours a day, getting herself on top of things. And, well, I know you are, because I know when you come in and when you leave. And she and our newest building inspector, who is Tim Weaver, are really connecting and doing a good job in an area that had been kind of weak this year because of some retirement or some resignations and one illness. So we've had a number of projects come our way. Some have been entitled and are on the way toward realization. Others are still unsigned but heavily courted. And that's what we do. On page 117, you can see what the org chart shows for the people who are working in that department. My salary comes out of the city manager's office, so I'm not out of this department. Okay. We have another department in terms of budget designation. It's not really an operating department. It's called General Fund Support. If you look at it on page 120, you can see what the spending centers are there. We have some tax sharing agreements, in particular the county of DeKalb. We have a transfer that we put into our debt service fund for some of our general obligation bonds. There's a transfer that goes to the capital projects fund, and there is a $51,000 transfer to the airport fund shown in this proposed line item. And that's because, as you will see as we get to the airport fund, either tonight or on Wednesday night, we are still not breaking even there, although the deficit has been reduced. And it was pointed out earlier that there must be some way to raise revenue there. I agree. The key revenue sources in a general aviation airport are the hangar rents and the fuel sales. There's obviously money that comes on the capital side of airport development from federal government, from the state government, from IDOT, aeronautics. But in terms of operations, those are the key functional areas, and there are some ways to increase that. Some years ago, we reduced the price of fuel at the general aviation airport, and that saw a pretty nice response. But there's an end. There's a limit to that strategy. If you price less, then you're going to have to sell more, and you can only sell so much unless you do some other things like expand your rents or expand your hangar use and the number of stops. And so marketing is a piece of that, and we intend to do more of that in 2020. So it's an area that's of concern to me. I haven't had as much time as I'd like to spend on that, but we have an active board, and that helps. And we are in the process of securing federal funds for some of the last big capital investments at the airport to get us to the threshold where we can fly in some planes that carry sports teams for NIU and some freight that goes in and out of the companies that we have here, which is currently being trucked, and that is something. We don't intend to ever compete with Rockford, which has a very large freight operation, but we do know that a variety of particularly the larger firms in Park 88 and hopefully south of Park 88 and Chicago West will need that. Yep.
I have a question as it relates to, am I loud enough here? When we expanded the runway, wasn't that supposed to provide the ability for these larger aircraft to be able to come in and?
Yeah, so here's, it always comes with strings. So the airport has those two runways, and 220, which is a 7,000-foot long crosswind runway, is plenty big. It's bigger than any of the runways at Midway. The problem is, to carry those larger planes, you've got to have those ramps that can support the weight. You remember one of the last air shows we had a B-25, a small World War II bomber, much lighter than some of the larger commercial planes that come in, and overnight it sunk down into the tarmac. So that's not a good thing if you're flying in and the word gets around. So one of the things we're going to be doing is resurfacing, adding another layer, which will secure that capacity, that bearing capacity. And also that runway and the original east-west runway are past the crack filling repair threshold, and we're going to have to do some resurfacing there. And one other piece, two other pieces. One is the last step on the aeronautical, all the lights on the side of the runways. I'm not a pilot. And the final piece is that when we built our cyclone fence all around for security and to keep animals out, it was too low. According to the Federal Aviation Administration, it's got to be in excess of 6 feet, and that's where we are, closer to 10 feet. So that alone is several $1 million. So we're, in the next 2 years, while TIF 1 still exists, going to have the money to provide the local match for federal and state monies toward these three things in particular. And that's our fervent hope we intend to do that. Right now, we're in search, as you know, for the money for this year. Thanks.
Bill, question?
Yes.
Oh, Bill, I had a question with
Yes,
the
Ron.
reduction here in community. My question is building inspectors, is that going down or is that staying the same or?
Building?
Building, yeah.
It's one body less because we have, we combine 2 part-time positions in 1 full-time position. And that, I think, will allow us to give more intense attention to code enforcement in particular. And we touched on issues we have in multifamily zoning areas right now. And that's an all-day, everyday affair right now.
Okay.
Sending somebody home at noon doesn't do us any good.
Okay.
Tracy?
Bill, I agree with Mark about making the airport more self-sufficient. I think we would all agree to that. If my understanding, the hangars are currently at capacity, and really, though our runway can handle the larger aircraft, we need to have a bigger hangar to draw those bigger planes. Am I correct?
You mean the city-owned hangar?
Yes.
If we can accommodate the planes that fly in and out for a sports event, because they generally sit outside anyway, and they stay for just a part of the day and then you fly out again. We have a couple of larger corporate hangars there, as you know, that can accommodate multiple planes. What we'd like to do is be attractive enough to, and I think we are, particularly at our hangar rates, we just have to get out there and shake the bushes and get some people to come out here to base their planes here rather than, say, DuPage or Aurora, taking nothing away from those larger and a little more sophisticated airport operations. But we need that strategy to make that happen. And I'd like to present something to the council in the next 6 months that will get us there.
If I remember from years ago, the plan was to get those larger hangars, and then Tony can probably fill in here, 100-foot door is probably our next big step, which is a huge hangar, to get those larger corporate. Is that correct?
Yeah, and we don't want to pay for them. We'd like somebody, we'd like to say, hey, we've got the land, we want to lease it, and
That's where I
we
was
have
going.
reasonable leases, and we have practically, certainly not busy skies. One of the reasons why trainers come out from DuPage and King County every night and every weekend is that they can do touch and goes almost uninhibited, and what we need is to attract.
Thank you.
I think we're still a pretty well-kept secret, and we're not keeping it secret, but we're not diminishing the shroud over that.
Thank you.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, we just finished the general fund. It is 20 minutes after 7. I think it's too early to quit. If you want to continue, I'm ready, if you are.
What's the wish of the council and the Finance Advisory Committee?
keep going.
Do you want to continue?
Yeah.
Small break and continue.
5-minute break, maybe?
Sure. Is that okay?
Yes, all right.
Sure, let's take a 5-minute break. We're in recess for 5 minutes.
Didn't mean to assume.
called it a exec commission. He's on there for a long time. So I've asked him, and I'll ask you if you know of anybody who's good at this. Okay, let's get after it, Dave. Thank you. Good. Bill, how are you? Okay, Jeremy, we're going to give it 1 minute, and then I'm going to gavel us back into session, okay? 1 minute. Yeah, we don't feel good. And for those of you watching on Channel 14 tonight, we will continue our joint meeting of the DeKalb City Council and the Finance Advisory Committee as we look over the 2020 budget, which will go to City Council for its approval at our next meeting. So, having said that, City Clerk Fazekas, do we need to do anything formally to get this back into session, or can I simply gavel us back?
Your
Okay.
call.
Okay. I've gavelled us back. Okay, now, we're on Section 5, Special Revenue Funds, and I'll turn it back over to City Manager Nicholas.
Thank you, Mayor. Before I go any further, was a little bit of organization I meant to do, and I just didn't do it. On page 34, mark this page. This has, in one place, and we did this last year in the budget, the fund balance information for the year ending 2019, and then where we think we'll be at the end of this coming fiscal year. But I think we made an improvement in this year's budget. Once you saw this in the last budget, then as you went through individual funds, you didn't see what the fund balance was. So you're always going back and forth, and what was that? I can't remember that. Every fund has that balance information now at the bottom of the numerical spreadsheet. So hopefully that's useful to you. It's useful to me, and so you will see that as we go along. We're going to do special revenue funds now. Some of these are well-known, and some of them aren't so well-known. We'll start with the Transportation Fund, which starts on 123. And I think most people know, but maybe they don't, that about a year ago, the city hit a threshold where it became the overseer of all our public transportation transit within our urban area. And that includes the fixed bus service that prior to that, the Husky Line was managing and operating, as well as a variety of paratransit services that provide door-to-door transportation on call. And some of those services take people to medical facilities, or it could just be shopping centers, it could be jobs. And I will say, just recently, and the council's aware of this, we saw an expansion in our routes, our fixed routes, by two. One taking people to and from Elburn, so they can jump on or get picked up from the train, and another taking workers and others down to Park 88, and it'll also be expanded to include Chicago West, which is south of the tollway between off of Gurler and between 23 and Peace Road. So it's a large, very large operation, and happily for us, it doesn't involve a huge local match. A lot of the funding comes from the federal government, but even more comes from the state government. There's something called the Downstate Operating Assistance Program, which the now deceased head of VAC used to call it the dope, and he was always saying, when are we going to get our dope? And that, you know, there's a limit to what you can do with that in a conversation. But that's very important stuff. And if you look, if you go over to page 126, you see those relative shares. The Federal Transit Administration in 2020, about 2.6 million, just under 6 million in the DOPE program. Then where it says miscellaneous revenue, really not miscellaneous, it's a combination of sources such as NIU's contribution, which is significant, and VAC and some other things, grants and so forth that aren't noted above. So it's a $10.8 million budget, and much of that gets spent every year. We will have a reserve at the end of the year of about $2.9 million. And a couple of these pilots that we're doing right now, the Elburn service and the service to the Park 88, are yet to be proven in terms of being able to offset the actual operating costs. I don't really think, Tracy, this is more your bailiwick, but I don't know that they'll ever actually break even, but we do want them to earn some money from riders so that we can offset the grant support. So that's a big program. I don't want to get into the weeds too far and the types of buses we have and so forth. It's a well-run system, and we have good partners in this, VAC being one of those partners, and a very strong partner. Tom?
From an overall perspective, then, the remaining balance, what is that allocated to? What's that going to be used for?
Well, we're going to build the balance because there are costs in the future. Part of that is the transit facility that we're looking to build in this area. VAC is too small to house the buses and so forth. Part of it is the replacement of the rolling stock, which, it's a mixed-aged group. We have a couple new buses, and we have some buses that are parked. And so those things aren't cheap, and it's good to have some kind of a budget. And those monies which are appropriated have to remain there, can't be used for other purposes.
So they're completely targeted.
Yeah.
Do we have any exposure at the end of the day?
Just what the formula is with each of the federal and state grants is we have to provide a match, a local match. So that's our exposure. You mean exposure in terms of balance, if it were to be
Well, no,
spent?
the exposure to the city from an
Yeah.
expense standpoint.
Just the local share,
Local
meeting
match.
local share, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to move on to the motor fuel tax fund unless you have another question on transportation. Okay, this is the fund that takes the state motor fuel tax money, which is limited for three things, really: road repair, and interestingly, we're allowed to use some of the money to defray the electrical charges for our streetlights, and also salt purchases. Both are related to transportation. And we intend to use the proceeds from the MFT, state MFT funds, for a couple of things in the next fiscal year. We have the Keystone project is going to be the upgrading of Twombly Road. And this is a collaborative project where the state, the county of DeKalb and the city of DeKalb and DeKalb Township are going to be participating. And the first phase will have to be some utility work that's going to be done, and we don't dare wait until the end of the paving to do that, so that's going to start, and depending on how the weather goes and so forth, the rush will be to try to actually do the paving by the end of the year. If we can't do that, because the utility work has so many excavations, and there will be some crossroad excavations that if they don't settle properly will become sags in the roadway within a few years. We'll see where we stand, but we will have the money to proceed to finish this project either in 1 year or a carryover into the second year. We love to do it in 1 year. And the other thing we're going to add to the project, which was not part of the original project, is a sidewalk on the north side of Twombly as you go west from Annie-Glidden Road to the end of Rosenau Drive, which is the end of the Indian's Garden development. And that is well used every day by young folks walking to the high school and people who are walking south to the very limited options they have at Hillcrest for buying food, doing other things. It's important. I'm working with Carolyn on this, and we've included it in the project. It's not designed yet, but the design is going to be partly paid by the MFT fund. Okay. Anything else?
Anything under motor fuel tax? Tom?
Okay.
Go ahead.
So we have some special service areas, and it was asked about earlier what's going on here. We've got some balances and so forth. Before I get to that, I just want to say that one special service area, which had been dormant, is now live, and that was the 924 Greenbrier, which is a property that took advantage of a loan program that we set up to help them get to the point where they had a fully sprinkler building in compliance with the Greek Housing Fire Safety Act. And I want to thank Fire Chief McMaster again for being a key player in getting this work done, and also with other Greek houses in the last 12 months. But we have some balances in the special service area funds, and here's why. There aren't major balances, but oftentimes the balance from one year where some money has not needed to be spent just for mowing isn't enough to do repairs that need to be done in cul-de-sacs, on islands and cul-de-sacs, which is something when curbing fails or when trees fail and some work needs to be done, there's never enough. So we basically are happy to see some accumulation so that we can store up enough money over a couple of years where we can go out and tackle those. Is that right, Andy? Is that generally what we use those for? So they're not large amounts, but they do exist and can be used profitably over time. Okay. Anything else on those? Very small part of the budget, but important to the residents who live in these areas. Let's jump into the tax increment financing program. 3 TIF funds are shown in this budget. One on its way out, and another one that is officially done based on council action at the end of this year, and another one that's just coming on, TIF 3. We'll start with TIF 1, which is Fund 260, and this TIF district was established in 1986, and it is has been the largest generator of tax increment financing funds for redevelopment activity and rehab activity in the city of DeKalb in the years that it's existed. It's been there have been a number of projects. The first one, a major project, was the DeKalb Pond Fisk rehab project, which raised some of the old tenements that have been built by the Elwoods and others for worker housing and later student housing. And I spent a year and a half in one of those once upon a time. And they were raised in single-family homes. Lots were created, and some rental properties in the vicinity were improved. That was the first kickoff, and there have been a lot of projects since then. But then there are also a number of years where we didn't come up with projects, and for whatever reason. And more recently, though, the council's been very active in trying to redevelop the downtown and has been dedicating TIF funds toward that purpose. If you look on page 137, you will see a very large transfer toward the bottom, $4,275,000, which is transferred to TIF 3. Oh, what was motivating that? Well, TIF 3, as you know, when it was conceived, basically is like the amoeba on top of a smaller portion of TIF 1 that runs roughly along the east-west axis of Lincoln Highway, a block or so to a couple blocks to the north and a couple blocks to the south, from about the lagoon over to east of 10th Street. And under state law, as that comes live, which it will on January 1st, 2020, basically TIF 3 bleeds through TIF 1. Maybe I could describe this wrong. TIF 3 is the floor, TIF 1 is the shroud, and it bleeds through. So now TIF 1 doesn't exist where those TIF 3 parcels are established. The benefit to us, one-time benefit, is when TIF 1 basically ends on those smaller number of parcels, 700 out of, say, 3,000 that were in TIF 1, we and other local taxing bodies get to see the benefit, because the EAV realized since 1986 can be realized in 2017, which would have been when the TIF 3 was conceived. So there is going to be a bump. They're going to be generating more but we have to assign, I'm getting to the point, we have to assign those TIF 3 revenues in the right place, which is TIF 3. So TIF 1 now starts going down. There still is some geography in TIF 1, which is outside of TIF 3, which will generate increment. But TIF 3 will be the focus for downtown redevelopment going forward. This is a bit of a guess. We're just lumping it all together. There will be, as projects come up in 2020, we will ask the council to amend the budget accordingly so we can reflect the true spending centers for this money. But we had to show it in the right fund. The next fund is TIF 2, which, and here, Ron, we see the zeros on page 139. You look to the right column. The 2020 proposed budget shows 0 because TIF 2 is terminated then.
Okay.
Okay?
Yep, thank you.
Yep. And then you can go back and forth on this as you wish. The TIF 3 on pages 140 and 141 then show where that money from the TIF 1 fund is going to be employed. And we will have a balance at the end of the year, a working balance of about $500,000, and then we'll see another incremental increase in 2021. So that will go. I should note, as I did in the background here, but it bears repeating, that TIF 1 will close at the end of 2021. So we have 2 fiscal years to wisely spend the increment that's still accruing. And we should have projects before the council, so the council can be in a position to vote on projects rather than how they want to surplus it. Okay.
The question.
Yes, Tom.
So as we look at TIF 1,
Yep.
other capital improvements are at $1 million
Yeah.
itemized. Are those specific to projects listed, or?
That's that's the airport allocation. We're guessing a little bit. You know, we have as I mentioned earlier, or I guess we really haven't gotten to that, but there is a local and a state and a federal share for most of the projects we're going to do. In some cases, just a local and a federal share. And this is pushing our chips in to what we are able to do at the local level, $1 million. It might be $750,000 by the time the year is over. We may not have the projects ready, but we have to spend the money in the next 2 years if we're going to help the airport reach its goal. That's it.
Thank you. So the council gets to approve those as
Yes.
they come?
Yep.
And the same would be for TIF 3?
As a general rule, I would say on the capital side especially, and also on the operating side, but particularly in the capital side, projects yet to be designed, bid, and allocated, we have to take to the council.
Those are always brought to council.
Yeah.
Just one other note. I noticed in TIF 3, there's an increment unto itself of $546,000. That's the property that was identified as TIF 3 properties?
Correct.
And that includes some of our newer buildings?
Yes.
To get us that kind of
Yes.
increment?
Well, actually, we've already captured some of the best of that, but we will, the Mooney building complex is in TIF 3.
I just would point out that that's a meaningful number.
It is.
And it's unencumbered. There's no sharing agreement.
Nothing.
So it's unencumbered
Yes.
in that way as well.
Yes.
Very positive to have some monies to work with.
I will say we owe some gratitude to our partners, our other taxing bodies. We had a number of discussions at the Joint Review Board level. We had 5 meetings, as a matter of fact, between January 1st of this year and the end of February, to talk about a variety of things. And what dominated the last 3 meetings is, shall TIF 3 have a revenue sharing agreement to it? And the idea was run out that maybe since the value of 1 year of TIF 1 was roughly equivalent to the value of 16 years of TIF 3 as projected, based on the smaller number of parcels and so forth, that in the interest of everybody to get some projects going, why don't we just knock off the last year of TIF 1, and we've already taken care of that surplusing. Yes.
Just one further comment, and I know that monies came back into the other taxing entities when that was closed, and the school district in particular, since some of us are involved in the finance committee there. One was able to utilize that money to reduce their bond
Bonds,
payments and effectively pass that money back through the community with a lower tax rate for that particular year, which I think is this year, actually. So
It's good use.
that was a positive use and a good use from a community perspective of how that rolled back.
Yep.
That probably isn't well understood.
Yeah, I agree. And we knew that was an option when we were discussing this too, and that was one of the things that motivated their support. Okay, unless there's something else, I'd like to move the Community Development Block Grant Fund, the CDBG fund. So, it's been a while, but in 1993, City of DeKalb was considered for the first time, and has consistently since then been a part of the Metropolitan Statistical Area. Otherwise, we call ourselves an entitlement city, which means we get federal funds for a variety of things for persons with low to moderate incomes, and that includes private property rehabilitation, includes emergency repairs. Some monies can be spent on public improvements, including street lighting and road repairs and so forth. Some work was done in the vicinity of the Twin Tavern in the early part of 2019, because the census of the persons and families living in the nearby housing all met the CDBG requirements. So that is possible. It has been used and will continue to be used in the Antigua North neighborhood for a variety of things in and around University Village. It's not a large amount of money that we get every year, but it is stretched very very professionally, very thoughtfully by the council on recommendation of Joanne Rouse, who's not able to be here tonight, but she is our community services coordinator, works with all the local not-for-profits and attends a lot of meetings, but is very experienced and sharp in dealing with the housing and urban development folks at the federal level. And our contacts are in the city of Chicago, so she does a lot of back and forth almost on a weekly basis to make sure that things are moving along. It takes a little while at the federal level for these things for plans to be approved, for money ultimately to be allocated and expended here at the local level. The federal government, as in other things, requires a 5-year plan. We're just at the end of the 5-year plan that ended in the current fiscal year, and Joanne will be coming back to the council to propose a new 5-year plan, and then each 5-year plan has annual plans that have to be approved, and so we'll have probably a 5-year plan and an annual plan, and hopefully get going on some actual redevelopment work and rehab work this year. And you see that we basically proposed, even though we don't know when we'll get this money and how much we'll get, proposed spending all of what we get. We don't always get to do that. And we have some carryover, which you're allowed to keep as long as you designate funds and they're part of a 5-year plan. Okay, unless there are questions about that, I'm going to move on to the Housing Rehab Fund, which begins on 144. The Housing Rehab Fund is really a residual from some Community Development Assistance Program, CDAP. It's an old program in the 80s and 90s that was providing housing-related rehab funds, and we are close to spending that down entirely. After that program ended, we turned this fund into a revolving fund, thinking we'll loan out some money, eventually get paid back, and we loan out some more. Never had a lot in that fund to generate a lot of energy, fiscally speaking, and at the end of 2020, we're going to be very close to having spent that down entirely. There's no new money coming in there unless we were to transfer some other funds in there, and we will make a recommendation in the next budget whether we just close this out and put this into maybe a CDBG or something else of a similar purpose. It has to be used for similar kind of purposes. Okay. Foreign Fire Insurance Fund. We should all have a foreign fire insurance. It's wonderful.
Yes.
It's a 2% tax. It's imposed on, and I'll just read this, and you can understand it. The gross receipts of the fire insurance premiums that are provided by insurance companies not located within Illinois, but for property located in our city. And we have the ability to use that through the auspices of our Foreign Fire Insurance Tax Board. And we have a reciprocal relationship. We can't spend the money on projects without the Foreign Fire Insurance Tax Board's guidance. On the other hand, they can't spend more than we bring in, so we have to have a budget. And so it's a good, we just had the meeting, was it this morning? Yes. And it's always been a good relationship. This money has to be used for the betterment of the fire department, and it has been for a lot of years, and you can see some of the things that are the targets for the spending, and if it wasn't for this, we'd have to take this out of the general fund. So we're happy to have it, and it's been used wisely, and we applaud the board for their prudence. Okay, you want to jump into debt service?
Yeah, Bill, what I would suggest here, it's about 10 minutes to 8 o'clock, and I know for some, they felt that we were going to be adjourning at 8. What I would suggest is that we go over the debt service funds.
And then get to the capital projects.
And then we get the capital projects. I mean, that's sort of where the rubber meets the road, if you will, for some of the capital projects and the street maintenance and other. Does that sound like a plan? And that, I would suspect we can come back Wednesday night and probably wrap this up in less than a couple of hours. But that would allow us to adjourn for tonight and then come back on Wednesday. Does that sound like something that makes sense to everyone? Okay, why don't we go through then Section 6, our debt service bill.
Okay. Well, the short of it is we still owe money, but we're grinding down our indebtedness. We have a number of general obligation bonds that have been issued over the years. We haven't issued anything most recently except for a refunding bond to take advantage of a call option that we had, which the council acted on in October. Actually, a lot of the council's work was in September, but we went into the market. We issued refunding bonds which financed the 2010 B bonds at a lower interest rate. That's the next to the last group of bonds there. It says general obligation refunding bonds of 2019 on page 151. And that reduced our interest from, say, roughly on average 4.5% to 1.82%. A good bargain, and we'll enjoy that to the end of the term. And the next two pages, 152 and 153, two charts. I guess we could have put it together, but it's clear, I think, this way. You can see the principal owed by the city on both our TIF debt and our GO debt, and also the interest over on page 153. The total principal and interest is a little over $19 million. That's about 3.2% of our 2020 EAV. As a home rule community, we don't have a limit on what we can borrow, but it's prudent to stay somewhere at 5 or below. Other communities, I think, have a limit. What is the school district's limit, Tom? Do you remember? In terms of
I know
EAV?
they were actually added.
Added. Is it 7.5% or something?
I don't know the ratio.
Something like that.
I know they maxed
So
it.
we've been, I think, especially in recent years, we've been prudent, and that comes to, in case you're wondering, $436 per resident. City indebtedness.
I must say that's a job well done.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
You can't make money any faster than doing that, Bill.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you, Bob. A couple of charts showing our debt schedule, and you can see the trends. We're reducing that debt on page 155 very steadily now. That's it.
Okay, we've gone through I guess, six sections of this 2020 budget. Before we adjourn tonight, are there any comments, any questions of City Manager Nicholas? If, obviously, if something did prompt your curiosity and you perhaps won't realize it until you get home, you can always bring that back, because just because we're going to start with Section 7 next week, or this Wednesday, does not mean that we're going to forget what we've talked about tonight. So any comments? Any questions? I think what I'm going to do, Chairman Peddle, is to entertain a motion to adjourn the City Council, and then if you would do likewise, to adjourn the Finance Advisory Committee. I'd entertain a motion from a City Council member to adjourn this special meeting of the Finance Advisory Committee and the City Council.
So moved. Second?
It's been moved by Alderman Fanouken, seconded by Alderman Favor. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
City Council is adjourned. Chairman Peddle.
Do I have a motion from the Finance Advisory Committee to adjourn this meeting?
So moved. I'll second.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned.
We are adjourned. Thank you very much.